This is Carl Ackerman, host of Journeys of the Mind, which is run by that wonderful mensch, Jay Fidel. I am so pleased today to be able to interview Dr. James Kumagai, who not only, as the title of our show says, fulfills the great cultural values of Hawaii, but has an interesting story to tell. So, good afternoon, Dr. James Kumagai.
Well, thank you, Carl. Yeah, thank you for having me on this program. I'm sure I look forward to and enjoying it.
Your life began, I mean, in many ways, in terms of the formation of values, by attending Lahainaluna Middle School and High School, and on Maui. And I'd like you to just to describe what that was like. And I also know that you have a scholarship there now in your name, so that's all wonderful. Giving back too.
Yes, I ended up in Lahainaluna High School, a boarder. And in those days, this was, right after the World War and so on. The Lahainaluna High School was known as a technical high school. And I wasn't quite sure why it was called technical high school. But they had a boarding department, and the rumor had it that all the misfits, the Kolohe people, and the downtrodden, and that problem kids ended up being boarders there. And the thing about being a boarder in Lahainaluna High School at that time, it was free room and board. So a lot of people that were down, as far as financially and so on, really were sent over there in order to get an education. In order to get free room and board, what we needed to do was work 3 hours a day, and maybe more if we goofed off along the way. So what it amounted to was we had a collection of people, or kids, you might say, that were, from all walks of life, where people from the reform school, people from, places that they couldn't get to regular, school and so on. But the one thing that I was called to the office many times, because of problems or another, by the principal. And in the process of getting scolding and talking to and so on, what I learned from the principal was H. Alton Rogers at that time. And he was there at that time for about 30 years or so. And he kept emphasizing, and what the takeaway that I got. Number one, all we had was each other. We had no money. We're downtrodden. We're misfits all over. But all we had was each other. And we had the land. We had to grow our own food, and we took care. We had our own power plant. We had our own water system, and we had to operate and run everything, grow our own food, and so on. And we had each other, and we had the land. And that is one thing that, really struck me and more as time went on. Well, whatever the situation was, we had each other, and we had the land, and we could make it. We put the school together. We had the grounds kit. We operate the power plant. We had our own water system. We had from pipeline from the ditch. We had no water treatment. And in those days, we had what they call the durum bag, the old, I guess, the tobacco, pouch and so on. That's what we had on the end of the spigot, and rainwater with all the dirt and everything like that. But besides that, we just had cold water for shower. We never had hot water and anything. So we had just the basic necessities that we're able to. And whatever we did, as far as growing our own food, we're almost a self-sufficient, school at that time. So I think that was very, very important that we had each other. And no matter how we didn't like each other or whatever, we all got together. Somehow or another, we worked together. And what is it that we had in common? The one thing when I thought back, we had to learn our school alma mater. And that school in Hawaii, we have the only alma mater in Hawaiian. We never understood what all the words meant, but we had to sing it about 2, 3 times a day, every day, before meals, before going to bed. That's the one thing we all had to get together to sing the song, and somehow or another, we got all together. We were together on something, and that was on our alma mater. The one thing also at the very beginning of the school year, borders, we had to carry lime up, on the Lahainaluna, Lahaina, if you look up the mountain, there's an L. We had to carry 40 pounds of lime, all of us, the freshmen and so on, the first year, borders, to carry that up there, about 2, 3 hours, and then just so that we can paint the L, with white. And every year we had, that's where one of the founders of, I guess the school that, that we celebrate, David Marlowe, he had his grave there. So we hiked up there, and David Marlowe, overlooking the whole of the Pacific, Lahaina. We can see island of Molokai, Lanai, the whole scenery, and we singing the song, our alma mater, O Kamalu. So this is something that was, iconic for us. And I think maybe that is the one thing to me that kept us together, and we all got together all in unison to do it every day. And we worked through and climb up the hill and doing that. So Lahainaluna High School, Mount Ball with the L, he was almost iconic. And one of my classmates, when he passed away, he said he wanted his ashes scattered up on Lahainaluna. And there are a lot of other, alumni that asked to have the ashes scattered there. So that was one of the icons, as far as Lahainaluna, to get us together, that we were very much together. We had each other, and we had the land, the blessing. The alma mater really refers and thinking about the blessing of nature and what we have in nature. Basically, we have ourselves, within ourselves, and nature to go by. And that's what we relied on, and that was really got us through. So that, to me, I thought was very important as far as, and after that, just about, and we got into the environmental side and the laws and everything. And that was the foundation. I think
Well,
we
I'm
were
gonna
together. So
I-
anyway,
I'm gonna
that's,
co- I'm gonna come back to this. In terms of the water for obvious reasons,
yeah,
because that's your specialty in terms of your engineering. But much like the Israeli kibbutz, which sounds a lot like what Lahainaluna was like in terms of people making their own food and being self-sustaining. But what I
oh,
wanted
yes,
to ask you, because like the kibbutz, often the children of the kibbutz go into the military, and I think that right after Lahainaluna, you did also.
yes.
And I want you to describe what happened there.
Well, okay. Most of us, not most of us, but a lot of us, some of them had, after graduation could go on to school, and and many of us, and especially the poor, we had no money to continue school and so on. And at the same time, in that period of time, this was, just about, late 40s and, the early 50s, the Korean War was on. Okay, so there was a big effort on the part of, I guess, government in the recruitment. So there was a push to create a, Hawaii platoon, enlisting us to join up for the military, the Marine Corps, the Army, and so on. Well, many of us, I think most of us, that were boarders, I think ended up signing up. And this is one of the things that I did also. Then I thought with the group that we join in as part of the Hawaii, especially the borders, in that we were together all the way through. And I had my roommate that he ended up actually joining the Marines and so on. But we all signed up and went ahead, and we're trying to stay together as a Hawaii group. But somehow or another, I got diverted. And, later on, I found out that, well, instead of going into the infantry, and somewhat I got diverted into going into the artillery, the gunnery side. And I couldn't understand why I was pulled away and then sent to that, that. And then I later found out that I had trigonometry in high school in Korea. They had this is again a warfare kind of thing, but they had the artillery howitzers, and then they had the heavy artillery coming in. And the problem with it in a warfare like that is that you not only have the enemy that you're dealing with, but you get hit from people in the back, as part of your own troops. Because people firing from back, the artillery, not only hitting the target, but the heavy artillery as well as the airstrikes, instead of hitting the enemy, they're hitting our own troops at times, because of the communication and confusion with the battles and everything like that. So what it amounted to was, well, I knew trigonometry. You get 100 and something howitzers guns spread out over miles. How do you get all the artillery pieces pointing one way to shoot at one target, 5 away? So the question was, how do you do that? And they, especially in a wartime, and especially in going into a foreign country, and we don't know anything or anybody, then how you even get everybody together to begin to even, aim the target, hit the right target, the right time. So it was a simple matter, actually. And what it amounted to was, okay, in order to get everybody pointing the right way, you got to point to find the North Star. So it's a matter of finding the North Star and then using, scopes and everything, then try to get everybody alignment that way. And on the map, then it's just more a matter of, trigonometry and trying to figure out, just where you are and so on. So somehow or another, I was just an 18-year-old now, just straight out of high school. I ended up in the forward observer crew. And then if the people in the battles ever found out that he was a 19-year-old kid calling fire direction to them, I think they would have freaked out in that period of time. But, it just, in a way that when I thought about it, it's just a matter of circumstance that I ended up in that role, that kind of role. It was never by choice. Never ever by choice. Somehow or another, the situation, put me in a situation where that's what I ended up doing.
Jimmy, how did you, your heroic work and your trigonometry work in Korea, how did you end up then using the GI Bill? Because I know that you had considered, like your brother, going into the military as a career. How did that transition take place?
Okay, it turns out that, that was Korea. And after the truce ended, instead of coming back home, that I said, I don't mind staying back, going to Japan instead. So what I ended up doing, and although I thought I was going to get a garrison duty kind of, a soft, people having a lot of fun, I guess in the Japan, situation there. But instead, I was sent for, again, wasn't quite sure how all that happened, but I was sent to amphibious training in Yokosuka. And I was sent to Hokkaido for winter training, the winter of 54. I was just about that. I was just 19-year-old at that point. And I said, why did I get in that assignment? Well, basically, the 7th Cavalry Regiment was getting ready to be on standby in case, it was a Korean truce. So if the war started, that was, they were supposed to jump off and, then go back to Korea. And I was assigned to the heavy mortar company. There was something new in the infantry. So how they going to get the heavy mortar company, heavy mortar, as a weapon into an infantry regiment? So somehow then that's how I was, assigned. And I was assigned as an acting gunnery officer. And to get that company combat ready. I was just a 19-year-old now, and somehow or another, they gave me that role to get that company combat ready. Well, it turned out that doing. It just turned out that there was a bunch of guys that that somehow or another we got together and we got figured out how to do everything, and we got it, got the whole company together that way. And somehow or another, going through the testing, kind of thing, then somehow they felt that okay, we were combat ready, and in the process, I did get a commendation. I got a medal for that, for some a commendation ribbon is what they called it. And I said, "What?" But somehow or another, it worked. But here we had, several bunch of guys that basically we all got together, not that I, gave orders and directed and everything, but there was a group of us, we all figured out how we're gonna do it. And somehow or another, everybody got into the hang of things and we figured out how we're gonna get that thing organized, how we're gonna get the fire direction, how we're gonna deploy it in combat. Somehow it worked. So at least from that standpoint, and I was also assigned to other projects, and because I was Nisei Japanese, they thought I could speak Japanese, and in Hokkaido and then in Japan, troop movements. They wanted me. They thought I could be the scout ahead before to the to reconnoiter all the places and things to go. Well, I just had somebody that could speak Japanese, or Japanese from San Francisco, Koton, we might call it. And he could speak well Japanese. So I put together a team and they sent me around. Well, it turns out that with that kind of assignment, I kept getting other assignments and I thought that well, it sounded pretty good, that. And then so they asked me if I can stay on, and continue. I said, yeah, I don't mind it. So, if I can keep on doing it. But it turns out that, I re-enlisted to stay on, but you come to find out, the Lebanon crisis came in a whole bunch of things, and then whatever I, intended at that time never really panned out. So I ended up being in Schofield, sent back to Schofield. And at that time, they were trying to get Pohakalo and all the different kind of things. And again, they had to get the Corps of Engineers. The Army couldn't do that. So somehow I got assigned to do the survey boundaries and that kind of thing. So I put together a group and in order to do that. But that's somehow the way things have, gone with me all the way. Never, it's just something that needed to get done, and I just happened to be there to be able to do it. I did it, and it worked.
That's wonderful. And these are group dynamics and also relying on other people and
That's
relying on
it.
your fellow
That's it.
soldiers, relying on your fellow students and developing your values about a real consciousness of you're not an individual, but you're part of the group, which is, I think, is an important aspect of your cultural values. And then how did you end up going? Because I think you mentioned that you went to the University of Hawaii.
There was the kind of point, again, I was assigned to, kind of point, and they had the Honest John rocket. Okay, but it turns out that, okay, instead of hiking up and all that, I had, one of the helicopter pilots saying, oh, he needs some flying time. So what it amount to, make a long story short, I caused, he was ferrying us up, on kind of point instead of hiking up and all that with all the equipment. It turns out that we ended up crashing the helicopter. And it turned out that it was my fault as the passenger of the helicopter. It's just that all the equipment, on there, and so going through all the investigation as to why, the helicopter crashed and all that. Fortunately, I survived. The pilot survived. Everybody else survived in that. But it turns out that okay, it's my fault. So I said, oh, the pilot, of course, what reprimanded and all that. But it turned out that the thing was, I had to, well, the thought was, I got to pay for it. I said, what? Yes, it's my fault yes. Then paying for the helicopter, I said, okay, so it was put, not maybe officially, but either I pay and stay in or get out. So basically, the way I'd put it, I was laid off. Otherwise, I probably would have stayed in the military and continued because and okay, so when I got out, and in that period of time was in the 50s, and there a lot of construction going on. I had survey experience, and here, of course, then I was getting all kinds of uh, uh, offers to at least help, everybody looking for workers and to help, and especially getting some kind of technical, survey experience and so on. So almost immediately, then I started to get jobs, and the jobs that I got were either nobody wanted or nobody could do. One of which was what there was a Nike missile base and just hiking up all day, carrying all the equipment up, on Manalo Ridge. There's a Nike, Nobody wanted to do that except, well, and then I had some, I guess the other people like me that looking for something to do, and he said, probably a good idea. So that's the kind of job. And the next job I had was, the surveying the I know Waipahu, the gym. It was in swampland. So to get out with the instruments and run toss into the swamp with all that, nobody wanted to do that. And guess who they called to do, to take on that job? And another one was in that period of time was going to Wake Island, to spend the Wake Island runway extension because of the jet aircraft and so on. Okay, they couldn't find anybody to go with, survey experience and so on, and especially diving experience because they needed to get a diver, somebody was scuba diver, and that's what I would. So these are the kinds of things what got me started, and then I never had to look for a job. There was always, a need for somebody to do it, and I was just persuaded to accept a job to do it. So that's how it all started. And
And
as I started, and then, eventually they said, okay, they started working for this Sanlo Tom and Haro, and they had it more to get more into the engineering side of things. And that's where I had the GI deal, and that's how I started to go to.
that's that's a very good wrap up because that GI Bill was proved to be not only fortunate to you for millions of other Americans. So if you could tell us briefly about your experiences at UH, and then you went to St. Louis, and then you went to perhaps one of the best universities in the United States and public
Yeah,
at that, the
thank
University of California, Berkeley. So, in a synopsis, what did you learn at these three wonderful universities?
you. The university is, and I started, of course, because I had some survey experience already. So basically, the professor that was, teaching surveying and all that found out and got me to begin to start working on things. But I started to go to school on a GIB on a part-time basis. And then as time went on, then they needed more and more, and there was more opportunities coming up. About that period of time, there was a need for what we call the tsunami research program. Was tsunami was April 1st, the big tsunami and all that. There were a lot of issues about what to do about the engineering side of things. So I started to get, from that, in order to do that and to go into more on the academic side, the engineering side of things. So that's how I started to head into that side of things. And I started to go into more into that. Then there was also on the structural side. So it's more the engineering side that I got involved with because there was a need for, that kind of effort. So as we started to go into that, then there was, of course, in about 57, Sputnik, there was, Russians put up Sputnik and so on. So there was a whole bit about science of engineering, more into the science and engineering side of things, getting a lot of effort there. And of course, there were a lot of grants and, research, they're trying to, so they, of course, this is where I get recruited into that. So as I started to go into that, then of course the pollution control, the environmental issues, the I guess all of these things, on the national front. So there was a big push for that, and there were okay. The firm I was with, Sanmo Tom and Haro, the president and the vice president were MIT graduates. Okay, so from that, so all these other things were MIT graduates in Washington, all over the place. So of course, somehow or another, that was part of that was the connection of the common thread to there, and then I began to get involved with that. So in the effort of that, then I got recruited from the Washington
Um,
University.
let me ask you.
So now the Washington University group, at the same time, locally, they were having problems with, uh, I guess, the wastewater discharges and so on. And they were trying to get all the companies involved, Dole Pineapple Company, the Primo Beer, all the, I guess, the canning, the tuna canneries and all that. Okay. So they needed help. And this is another, again, I happened to be. So they started to look at me to, would I look into it kind of thing. So what it amounted to was they had a contract with one of the professors at Washington University in St. Louis. The St. Louis, because of the industrial companies and all that. So already they wanted to get that. And of course, they came to me and they said, would I join in on the program and so on. So what I started to do was, get involved with the academic side, and especially when it came to the environmental issues, because the chemical companies and all that. So there are a lot of issues about what the problem was with all the pollutants and the chemical pollutants and the waste discharges and so on. So they were talking in terms of what is naturally, synthesized organic matter versus the synthetic manufactured. And then there were differences in the pollution that, it caused. What is synthesized in nature can, degrade and, take care of in going through. The problem was the synthetic chemicals.
Did you have the same focus at UC Berkeley? Was it all water-related issues in terms of engineering?
Berkeley, of course, had a completely different, approach, to what not the complete the same, well, basically a different way of looking at things too. So well, actually, about the same time in that period, there was a lot of the focus on nuclear engineering, nuclear, power plants, and so on. So I was getting, I guess also recruited to try at Stanford want to start up a nuclear engineering program. And I was asked if I would be interested in joining them in getting to nuclear engineering and so on. But also Berkeley had nuclear engineering anyway. But as far as Berkeley was concerned, Berkeley had a different approach to, I think, the other universities. In more the academic side, they were more interested in, you might say, truth. The other private universities especially, were more along the going with the uh, contributors of, the money side of things, the financial. So, he's almost, basically the big donors and, the research grants and so on. This is, the push over there. Berkeley was more the other way, is the way I saw it. It was more what is the truth, we know the truth and sincerity, you might say. The science is truth and sincerity. And not only that, Berkeley, when I went to Berkeley in the period of in the 60s, when I first showed up on campus, some grad students in class were showing up in coat and tie. And here I showed up in a sweatshirt. And we were just married, and my wife, and any faculty gathering, the women were all in furs. Some of them were in furs, and here, and she felt very out of place, the manner of dress and so on. At Cal, you didn't even have to wear clothes to show up in class, in that period of time, 60s, versus a coat and tie in class. You can go stark naked, and, that was the difference, you might say. But as far as the Berkeley side of things, I thought that what what I think I got out of the Berkeley side, I almost flunked out Berkeley because of my choice of the dissertation was more on the physical chemistry of it and going into the quantum mechanics, the new, in other words, the physics and the chemistry. They completely revolutionized the thinking and the approach analytical. So basically, what we had was in this particular case that, in this class, and then at Berkeley, I had to, in the graduate work, I had to, out of engineering, I'm going into more with the chemistry and physics. And I'm with a grad student in chemistry and physics, in a completely out of my, and here I'm competing against them academically in the classroom, we have to meet a GPA, requirement. And I say, good grief. And then here the students in chemistry and physics, and already they were up to date. They're grad students. And here I'm grad, out of the engineering nuts and bolts side of things. So I had a very difficult time in trying to deal with what they call these, at that time, Schrödinger's wave equation. So finally I went to see the professor. I said, I'm afraid I'm going to have to drop the course. I said, in 2 weeks, I don't know. I just sitting there wondering what the hell am I doing in this class, But he laughed at me, He laughed at me. He says, I know what your problem is. I said, yes, I had, I'm short in math, the chemistry and physics. He says, no. He said, what you need is philosophy. I said, what? And I said, wait a minute. He said he recommended 2 books at that time, and actually I ended up reading more. Was Schrödinger's, and the first book was, he said, read Science and Humanism. The second book was What is Life? And these are written by, particle physicists. And I said, what? I said, and I started to read that and what it amounted to. And the wave equation. And after that, somehow or another, the wave equation, although I still can't solve the equation. So they said, okay, what is it this? I said, okay, this is how I look at it. What he's saying is that water always flows downhill, high energy to low energy. And where it's going to come to is when it reaches a stable point. He said, yes. I said, I don't need the equation, not solve the equation to know that. And the chemical bonding and all that, where's all the electrons going? The minimum energy state, in the end. So anything else is just transit in that end. He said, yes. So just on that, he said, this is what, basically what it amounted to. So I stuck it out, the whole plan.
You were so joyful that you were able to take the time today, Dr. James Kumagai, with your extensive story and your extensive wisdom. And we are just happy that you took the time to be with us and here today in Journeys of the Mind under ThinkTech Hawaii. So we say aloha to you, a hui ho, and thank you, Dr. James Kumagai, the man who is a humanist, a scientist, and someone who embodies the values of Hawaii.